Welcome to the Gen Z Stoic Podcast.
Where every week we strive to lead younger generations on a path to virtue through the insight of Stoic teachings and personal stories from our lives as Gen Z Stoics.
Welcome back to the Gen Z Stoic Podcast. I am your co-host, Mateo.
And I am your co-host, Ren, and with us this week we have Brendan Hogle. Brendan is the co-host of the Street Stoics podcast and one of the co-founders of Via Stoica. You can find him on his social media, Boggles the Stoic, where he has many insightful posts about Stoicism. So, Brendan, we're very excited to have you on. Thank you for coming on the Gen Z Stoic podcast.
Oh, thank you guys. Appreciate what you guys have been doing for Stoicism as a movement, and I'm excited for our conversation today.
We are too, even though, it's taken 6 attempts at this point. We've had a lot of build up, so we're very excited. First, let's start off. Where did your journey with Stoicism start, and how has that journey been since implementing those principles?
Yeah, no, the tech problems, no big deal, boys. You can't stop a bunch of Stoics. That's one thing I've learned. So we'll figure this out. For me, I got started with Stoicism back when I heard Ryan Holiday on a podcast, on Tim Ferriss's podcast. He was promoting his book, The Obstacle is the Way. And I said, wow, this philosophy does sound like something that I can resonate with and definitely aligns with kind of some of the mentors in my life that I had. So I started listening to Ryan Holiday's Daily Stoic podcast, and that's how I kind of got aware of what Stoicism was. But it took me about a year or two before I started really picking up text and reading about it and starting to apply it into my life. But yeah, I'm sure we'll get into that as we keep going.
And as you've kind of gotten into your Stoic journey, what are some key points that you've really kept in your Stoic journey since the beginning until now? Like, what are 3 kind of anchor points that you've had stoically in your life that have kind of stayed from the beginning to now?
I mean, for me, it was this, I'm an entrepreneur and I stay really busy. I'm always kind of, whether I'm working on a current project or chasing a new one, I just feel like I always have about 6 plates spinning at once. And Stoicism really helped me to narrow the viewpoint of what I am supposed to be putting my time and energy into. So that idea of focus on what you can control and ignore what you can't. And I used to have this idea that I could control everything, like I could influence and force everything to be the way I wanted it to be. But after studying Stoicism and falling on my face a few times, I realized that, that's not the case. And I really need to be hyper focused if I plan on being successful. And that's what I plan on being. So this is definitely the core of what attracted me to it initially. And then, the things that really that I keep finding myself going back to are just a few quotes that I remind myself, you never step in the same river twice. We're always changing. We're always different people. We're always growing. We're always on this process. Like there is no destination necessarily to me. It's all a journey. Like it's all one thing leading to the next. So that's an idea of Stoicism that I really hold true and hold with myself often. And then last is this idea that, which is new to me. When I was younger, I was much more of like kind of a lone wolf. Like I can do whatever I want on my own and just get through it. But Stoicism really helped me realize the importance of community and having other people in your life. And that's one thing that I've like grown into, I would say. I didn't start that way, but it's definitely the way I am now.
And I think that community aspect is highlighted once you get into what we could call the Stoic community. We've kind of delved into that, getting guests on the podcast, and you're an example of it. But everybody we've spoken to is just so nice, so kind, and so understanding. It's Stoicism kind of gets that bad rap, right, for being apathetic. People are apathetic and they don't care. Like you said, it kind of, if you don't delve into it, you might think it's a lone wolf mindset. But once you get into this community, what you realize is it's one of the most supportive communities I think in the world, and it's one where you're constantly uplifting because it's that mindset you said where we're always growing, we're always moving forward. That's why we call it the Stoic journeys, because it's a lifelong journey that never ends, because you can never be perfectly stoic. You always just have to get better day by day.
Yeah, no, it's funny. And even like Benny, who's a guest, he's my business partner and a guest you've had on your podcast before. Him and I have talks because, I call myself Boggles the Stoic. And he's like, I don't even feel comfortable sometimes calling myself a Stoic because it's part of the process. Like I'm in the process of becoming a Stoic and I will be doing that until the day I die. But I just feel like that I call myself that because that's what I'm trying. That's what I'm kind of reaching towards is to be that stoic in 100% of situations, and I'm definitely not. But the journey is the joy. That's where the fun happens.
Well, I think the best way to really enjoy the journey is kind of like, you were talking about, Benny, is not really labeling yourself as a stoic, because once you kind of label yourself as one thing, it's very hard to be another if you let it kind of restrict, what the word stoic means. And we've done an episode on labels, and we kind of talk about that a lot, is, and especially about the stoic thing recently, is if you label yourself as a stoic, which our podcast, yes, is the Gen Z Stoic, but we try not to label ourselves as Stoics, but more as practitioners of Stoic values and Stoicism as a whole, then it's a lot easier to enjoy the processes and to learn a lot of new things as well. Because one thing I've learned, and this is not just with Stoicism, it goes really heavily with me for weightlifting, is no matter how long you've been in it, you're always going to be learning new things, and there's always going to be someone who's more experienced or spent more time, studying a certain field or a certain lift or whatnot, and they're going to be there to teach you things. So if you're like, yeah, I'm a stoic, you're kind of restricting yourself from being able to learn from other people who are also, practicing stoicism.
Yeah, no, and that idea too, like I love that concept that Stoicism calls us to all to be lifelong learners, to really try and keep learning, keep growing. And that concept that you just touched on there's always someone in the room that knows more than me about something. And whether that's Stoicism, like I cannot, that's why I love coming on podcasts, because I just want to talk to other people that study it, because I know no matter how long I've been studying it versus anyone else, like they're still going to teach me something. They're still going to highlight something that I didn't think about or give me a different perspective. And that's the fun part, like going back to that community. That's the fun part of like getting involved in a community and really digging into that community more than just being a watcher of that community, but really getting into it and getting involved in it is where you get most of the gold nuggets from.
Yeah, I think Mateo and I, the number one benefit of having guests on the podcast is what we've learned since we've started doing that. That's, we obviously enjoy providing good content, but for us, we're sitting here and we just get to have weekly discussions with very interesting people who have such different life perspectives that we're just learning new perspectives constantly. So that's the number one benefit for that. One thing that I kind of run into, especially as it relates to Stoicism and philosophy overall, is once you get into it, it's this idea of you can never learn enough, right? You can never stop learning new things. And so we kind of get overwhelmed in a sense. It's very easy to get overwhelmed saying, how many essays does Seneca have? Am I going to be able to read them all and apply them all? How many works do other famous Stoic philosophers have, or other philosophers from other schools have? How do I get to that point where I have read enough, or I have, consumed enough really to consider myself a practicing Stoic? And so I'm just curious on your perspective, because you've been around a little bit more than we have. You've been on this earth longer than we have been. So as it relates to time, right, and within this journey, how have you prioritized in terms of like, how do I read enough? How do I consume enough? When can I say that like I have read and consumed enough, now I can go and practice it? Or can you ever say that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, for me, it was interesting. I didn't, I got into reading heavily right as I was kind of starting my businesses and things like that, is when I started, and at that time it became more about just numbers. I was just trying to pound through books just to get information. And it actually wasn't until I heard Ryan Holiday talking about it, because he's literally a person whose job it is to read books and pull out pieces of information and then put them into his own books. And so he reads, I don't know, some 50 100 books a year, I don't know, but he was talking about all the books he reads, and he was like, but I get a lot more value out of rereading books, not necessarily just trying to get numbers. So that's when I really had a big shift, and I like didn't hyper focus on numbers or how many books I was reading a year, just more about what value am I getting out of them. If I read 50 books but don't get any value from them, what's the point? The value I get out of reading Meditations once is more than I've gotten from 20 other books probably. So to me, it's more about the value you're getting out of it, and then how you're applying that. So, and then how you can know that is to have some sort of routine reflection. So I think that is something that Stoics call us to do as well, is whether that's weekly or monthly, journaling, reflecting. And I do that in each level of my life, whether that's professional or my personal life or whatnot. But when it came to reading, I said, okay, I'm going to finish a book. I'm going to write down the 5 to 10 things that I'm taking out of this book that I learned from it. and just have some notes. And going back to those notes has been a really nice way to sort of revisit the books and let me know, okay, maybe this one I need to dig a little bit more on, or get a similar book that's on that topic. So for me, I mean, there's no end. I would say, how do you know when to, like, when you're never stopping? It's a whole process of reading, applying, rereading, reapplying, and that's the process of life. And we talk about the process a lot in our spaces on X and things like that, because it is so key in everything in your life, no matter what, if you're habit changing or trying a new thing, like all of these things require a trial and error process, and to see what works for you. So the idea is to just kind of listen to as many people as you can, listen to as many people who are on the same path as you, maybe a few steps ahead, and then apply what they're telling you. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, try something else. And for reading, for me, reading, I have moments where I'm reading 5 books at one time, and then I have moments where I'm like, look, I just gotta focus in on this one thing. So it also is seasonal for me. So sometimes in moments in my life, I read a little bit differently than I do in other seasons, just depending on what's going on in my personal and professional life.
Well, like what you said about switching it up, and I think if we kind of broaden out philosophy as a whole, we can look at Stoicism as kind of just a very small part of philosophy as a whole. It's something you can try, right? For us, it's something that we've really delved into very deeply and kind of made our entire personal brand around, right? Because it really resonates with us and it really clicks with us. But I think a good like life example of what you're saying is, even if you were just interested in exploring philosophy, you can try Stoicism and you might get a few things, but then you could go into existentialism, or you could go into, more Eastern philosophy and whatnot, right? And there's so many. And I think something that's very amazing about philosophy is no matter where you are, you're going to find a lot of connections to, individual practices, right? I mean, Stoicism and Taoism have a lot of connections. Stoicism and existentialism have a few connections here and there. And it's all about kind of making your own cognitive map with whatever you're doing in life. It could be, if it's philosophy or stoicism, or if it's your job or your career or something like that, trying new things out, or if you're in the gym, trying new lifts out, trying new routines out, everything, so you can kind of figure out what's best for you. It's hard to explain to people what works for you might not work for them, because when we kind of look up to these people, we're like, oh, I kind of want to do what they did so I can reach their level of success. It's not like that. And I think that's a very key point, is that we're all going to resonate with different things. We're all going to pick different things out of meditations or letters of a stoic or works from Epictetus like discourses. And I think for you, you explained it very well. You love going on to podcasts and hearing what people have to say, because even though you've had more life experience than us, we might be looking at an experience differently than you have, and we might be able to give you that, alternate perspective that helps you maybe make a breakthrough or learn something new.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really think that because we're all so unique, we're all so different, and we have our different biases and different backgrounds and different upbringings and all those sort of things, that we all do view things differently. And to keep an open mind and in staying curious is really the best way to do it. But what we try and do at Via Stoica, whether that's with our coaching or our workshops or anything like that, is tell people, like, we're not trying to turn you into Stoics. Like, yes, Stoicism is the backbone that we use, is the foundation that we use. But I mean, even me personally, like, not everything in my life is just purely based on Stoicism, but that's where, like, that's my home base, right? That's where I go back to and I feel comfortable. And that's what we're trying to do, is really just provide these tools and teachings to people. And then they take it and figure out how that works into their special recipe of life, because not one recipe doesn't fit everyone. And I think that only you can figure out what that exact mixes of ingredients is. But you find that out by listening to others. So that's where that kind of community aspect is really important, and connecting with others is really important.
And I think the reflection aspect is maybe crucial as well. You mentioned the reflection aspect is part of it. I found it interesting you mentioned Ryan Holiday from the start, because he's popularized that like note card method he has, which I have not come to understand yet, but I've seen it a lot. And that's just one way of, I guess, active reflection, is just writing in note cards. But it's like we're saying here with, discovering the different schools of philosophy, different forms of reflection are going to take place in different individuals' lives as well when it comes to reading. Like, for example, I could not get behind the note card method. I tried it for a few books because I saw it on the Daily Stoic social media, and I was like, that seems interesting. Let me try this for a few books. Looked up how to do it. I did it, and I was like, I hate this. this doesn't make sense for me whatsoever. Versus just, keeping a notebook where I write just like quotes from the book that apply. That has been more effective for me. But it's just another example of taking it personal and seeing how it works for you and what works for you. Books
Yeah.
really relate closely to that. And I think the most important aspect that we can highlight here is that it's never really enough, that you're never done reading, you're never done learning. I think that people kind of have this sense, we have a lot of people, especially in America, who like read To Kill a Mockingbird in high school and then they're like, I'm done reading. That's
Mhm.
enough for me. And you miss out so much by not reading. There's so many
Mhm.
books out there that have such great knowledge that you miss out on by choosing not to read, where I would say we say don't waste our lives, don't waste time. That's a very popular Stoic thing, is don't waste time. And one of the biggest ways, best ways that I think you can spend your time is reading. Because if you want a quick way to learn something from somebody else's life without talking to them or interacting with them, pick up a book that they've written. Because that's especially my life philosophy, is every book you're going to learn one thing from somebody else's life experience. That's just the basic kind of philosophy I've taken towards reading in books.
Yeah, I mean, that's been like my kind of my go-to thing when people ask, what sort of a piece of advice would you give to like a younger person or a person 10 years behind you or that sort of thing. And it's always read more, because that's what that's, I guess, if I had to list some regrets, I don't really have regrets, because I enjoy the person I am today. So, but if I had started to read earlier, I think my sort of entrepreneurial pursuits would started sooner and things like that. So like at the end of the day, here I am doing my thing. So I'm happy with it. But no, I do think that there's no time wasted reading a book. But also the small caveat to that is, if you're reading a book and you're a decent way through it and it's not that good, just put it down. The author's never going to know. No one's going to know. You don't have to waste your time reading a book or just getting to the end because you feel like you're supposed to. So that's one problem I had with myself, was like, once I picked up a book, I had to finish it. And over time, I've realized that's not necessarily true.
Do you have a couple of books or a couple of reads that like Stoic works that are in your top four, top three that you've reread, many times? Like you were saying, you find a lot of value in rereading books, but do you have a top couple selection of works that you would recommend to, even us or beginners or just anybody who's interested?
Yeah. So first, I like to also do some like not necessarily Stoic books, but they are like, the themes make sense. So Essentialism is one of the first books I read by Greg McKeown, that really, like, I call it like a perspective shifting book. And just the idea of focusing on essential things, not ignoring non-essential things, like you see the themes here between control and not control. But that was a great book and really gave me kind of a framework to say, like, where should I be spending my time. And I started to develop this relationship with time. I consider time to be our most valuable asset. It is the only asset we can never get back. So how you use your time is super important. And that's where I got that idea from, is this book, Essentialism. And then another one was, Tim Ferriss, The 4 Hour Work Week, was kind of the book that set me on this journey of saying, I want to work for myself. I want to be an entrepreneur. And how do I do that? And one of the themes in his book is just kind of saying, like, look, if you can figure out a way to make money in the United States, but live in a country outside of the United States, then you're going to retire early. You're going to live much comfortably. Like, life is just going to be easier for you. And I'm living it right now. And I can say that is 100% the case. But what it did for me more than that was just gave me a way to just like kind of view things from a different perspective. Like, I always had this idea that you have to go here, you get a job at this corporate place, you stay there for 20 years, you build yourself up, you get a pension, you do the whole kind of like rat race that everyone talks about. Like, that's the way you retire. But this book was saying, no, 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 you don't have to do that. You can work for 5 years and then take a few years off, and then maybe work for a little bit and then take some time off. And it kind of just gave me this new perspective. So I always value anything that gives me a different perspective. But as far as the Stoic works that I really resonated with and liked a lot was William Irvine, How to Live the Good Life. I think that is a really good one. And Massimo Pigliucci, How to Be Stoic. Those two books, I think, are really great, super easy reads, easy to understand, and like understand how these teachings, while they are 2000 years old, apply to a modern day life. So I think those two would be my most recommended.
We'll have to check out some of those books. I don't think Mateo or I have read some of those books you mentioned. So that's always great to have people on who have new books to offer us. That's one of our favorite parts, new knowledge to acquire. You mentioned time as a crucial aspect before you got into the books, and the time aspect is something that we don't get back. I think too many people don't realize that. I think, especially in our generation, where we're kind of consumed by our phones and things that distract us from the fact that time is kind of whittling away. And time is one of the strong suits, I would say. The teachings around time is one of the strong suits of Stoicism. It's one of the first things I was attracted to when I started reading Seneca, as he talks a lot about wasting time and how we really treat our days like tomorrow is a guarantee when it's not. And it's something that's really resonated with me. So when you first discovered those teachings, because I'm sure you came across those early in Stoicism, it's one of the major themes. What was your first reaction to kind of that thought? Had you already kind of realized that, or was it kind of eye-opening? Because for me, it truly was eye-opening, where I had that kind of rat race in mind, where I was like, I'm going through high school, I have a good GPA, I'm going to get into college, I'm going to go to college, I'll probably do well in college. Boom, I get my degree. Now I'm going to go work for a company or a law firm for however many years, and hopefully I can retire when I'm 60. And that was kind of my life philosophy, or like my life plan. And then I read, the concept of like memento mori and a lot of Seneca's teachings around time, and I was like, if I have one life to live, that's not the life I want to live. So was there a realization for you when you first discovered Stoicism like that, or have you always been somebody who's like, I have one life to live, I'm just gonna go out in a blaze of glory and give it my best?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that I had started to understand the idea of time being of importance and how we spend our time, but I was looking at it on a much, let's say, maybe with a wider lens. So like I was just looking like, okay, I was very cognizant about not overworking myself. So I heard about this idea of people. My background's in accounting. So when you work in accounting, you're supposed to get an accounting degree and then go to an accounting firm. And then during accounting season, you basically work like 80 hours a week. And you just accept that as a part of your job. And I was kind of like okay with that to an extent, but I didn't go to an accounting firm because I wanted to avoid that. But even in my corporate life during tax season, it's expected of you to kind of just like work late. But I was very like strict of, no, I'm only giving you this much extra time. Like, and so what I think Stoicism brought to my attention, in Seneca specifically, was I like to remember quotes, but I kind of paraphrase them, so I never get them right. But it's the idea that, we give away our time as if it's, people asking for money on the street. Like we're just handing people our time. But if they came up and asked us for money, we would say no. But we have no problem just giving our time here. So that's when I started to think about things like, I used to be really involved in politics and understanding what was going on in the day, the ins and outs of bills in the Congress and that sort of stuff. And then I realized just like what a waste of time that was, and how like it wasn't causing me any sort of joy, mostly just bringing me stress. So this idea of like, oh, maybe I spend 30 minutes, an hour a day reading the news, catching up on what's going on. That didn't seem like a lot of time to me. But what I didn't put into perspective is, oh, I go read the news for a half hour, and then I might be upset about it for another 3 hours. And like that part of me did not, like, I didn't put that into perspective until the reading Stoicism and really digging into that more. So, and then as far as like my time as an entrepreneur, I really kind of just threw myself into being an entrepreneur. I always knew that was the path for me, but I guess I just, didn't think it would happen until I was into my, deeper into my 30s or something. But I ended up leaving my job at the PGA Tour with no plan whatsoever when I was in my mid 20s, and just being like, I'm out of here. And that was not something that was part of the plan, but I realized, like maybe similar to what you are talking about, is wow, I'm going to have to stay in this job, and I'm going to have to work here until I'm 55 or 60. And then I'll get out, maybe, if pensions still exist and everything's still working out and cooking there. And I was like, but I could also just get hit by a bus next week. Like, I think this is a far riskier situation. People were so concerned, like, you just quit your job with no plan. Like, what are you going to do for money? And I was like, I don't know. And they're like, isn't that risky? And I'm like, that's the point. Like you have to do risky things. If you want unique experiences in your life, if you want things to happen in your life that are abnormal than others, then you have to go do abnormal, unique things. And sometimes they're risky. And that's the point. That's when I said to myself, I was like, I can't sit here for another 40 years. I'll kill myself. Like, there's no way this is happening. So that was the risk to me, was staying in a corporate environment until I'm 60 and retiring. That was too risky to me. Going out and pursuing my passions, that is something I can hang my hat on. If I go out and fail miserably, so what? I can always go back to accounting.
There's the difference between just thinking about it and actually taking action. And this isn't necessarily a Stoic concept, but I talk about the law of attraction a lot. And I think the big thing, and like you said, it's not like you were just thinking about quitting. You're like, oh, I could live this life. And just the thoughts alone didn't attract anything unique. It was actually the action of quitting your job and taking this big risk that attracts kind of how you are. Like the state of vibration that you're in, that's the kind of energy you're going to attract to yourself, right? And so, same thing with Stoicism. Just by reading it, you're not going to be Stoic. It's about actually going out and acting in those ways and putting those actions into place and really living them day by day. That's going to attract a Stoic community to you, and it's going to make you more Stoic in situations, and people are going to kind of start to notice you. You can't just read and think and ponder about it and kind of dream about it, or else those dreams are going to stay on the pillow if you don't actually get up and go make it happen.
One thing I was going to add is that risk that you talk about inherent in an entrepreneurial journey is one that you're risking on yourself, right? You're betting on yourself. And I think the concept for me is I would much rather bet on myself than bet on some corporate entity to bail me out once I've given 40 years of service to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something, we talk about control a lot in this school of philosophy. That's another element of control, right? I would much rather be in control of my journey and making my own dreams come true rather than relying on a corporate structure and societal system to bail me out at the end of the road. That's
Yeah.
something that's very big for me.
No, that's definitely, and that's what I also said too, is like, corporate environment is not going anywhere. Like if I want to get a job, I can go do that. I have a degree, like, and that's kind of the advantage to I did get my degree and then right away went in and got experience, because I felt like that would give me something to say, hey, yeah, I worked at this company for 5 years. I did a lot of good things. And then I went and started a bunch of my own companies. And yeah, maybe they didn't work out. Okay, but here I'm back now to join this corporate environment. Like it's not going anywhere. Wall Street's not going anywhere. So that's the idea that you can't go back to it. This is what the biggest change for me over my entrepreneurial journey has been. I used to be such a planner and a strategizer before. Like I wouldn't really do things, take leaps without planning it all out. And then finally I just said, the plans have never, like, yeah, they help me to like think through things. But at the end of the day, the plans never actually nothing goes according to plan. You always have to adapt and adjust. And that's one thing too with Stoicism that I've taken out of it, is this idea of resiliency and grit and just kind of pushing through it, even though it's difficult. But that's the point, right? Like it's the idea, you don't take on challenges unless it's going to be challenging. And I am a firm believer, one of the other things that I tell myself all the time is nothing worth having comes easy. So if it's worth it, if it's worth if it's something that's really valuable to you, then it's going to take some work. It's going to take some effort, and it's not going to come easy. And even like the study of Stoicism and becoming someone who's now, like I said, I've been doing this for almost 10 years, like 7, 8 years. And now I'm finally at the point where I'm like, hey, I think I might know enough to be able to tell others about this. And this just took me almost a decade just to kind of experience that. So, you never know where it's going to take you, but I think following your gut at the end of the day is what you should do, because yeah, maybe you fall down, but like at the, lessons, that's what you learn when you fall, is lessons. What are you going to trip over? But you get yourself up and you try again.
I like the point you brought up in the beginning where you said you can't stop a bunch of Stoics. Like you can't really stop a group of Stoics. And I think one thing that you were touching on, but didn't say like verbatim, is adaptability. Is in Stoicism, it makes you very adaptable. And I'm totally with you there. It really resonated with me when you were like, I'm a planner and a strategizer. I need to have like, steps A, B, C, and D laid out. I need to see the path that I'm going in order to perform well. And that's not saying that I can't, or that you can't, perform well in kind of a messy situation. I mean, look at the podcast. I mean, it took a couple days to even get this going. It's a very small example, but it's things like that. And when you react stoically to adversity, it's a lot easier to be adaptable. If you were to react emotionally, and if we just got upset at Riverside and broke our computers, and we'd never get anywhere, we never would have been able to do this. But with patience and knowing that it's out of our control that Riverside wasn't working, and so we had to move to Zoom, and kind of understanding that we can only control the things that we were able to make it work. Very small, minuscule example that has really no significance in our lives. But if you adapt that to a bigger scale, and the big choices that you have to make and the very big obstacles that you encounter, your life is just going to be so much better. And it's not saying that as soon as you become stoic, you're not going to encounter hardship. It's saying that when you're stoic and you do encounter hardship, you're going to get through it better than if you didn't have it at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like there's no better learning ground than travel. And I did a lot of my travel around the world. I did it during COVID, so which was also a whole nother thing of like traveling during COVID. So I got very used to, thinking on my feet and problems arising, and then, my wife and I having to solve them in a hurry. So yeah, I think that, you go through this gauntlet of life, these you choose your challenges at the end of the day. When you choose to do one thing, it that opens the doors up for what's going to happen. And that's what happened with us. As we were traveling, we were running into a lot of issues, and it was extremely stressful. But I was just, one day I kind of realized, and I was like, this is the life we chose. We chose to live outside of the country. We chose to be digital nomads and travel around. But we didn't have to do that. We chose this. And what comes with that is sometimes flights get canceled. Sometimes, entry requirements are changed at the last minute during COVID and things like that. But it's in that training, right? It's in the over and over again repetitiveness where you become. Now, when I go to an airport, I'm cool as a cucumber. Like nothing can phase me at an airport. It's impossible because I've just done it so many times that it's always going to work itself out. It's always going to find a solution one way or another. And that carried over into other areas of my life. Business became easier, life became easier. So I just think as you embrace challenge and accept that challenge is coming, no matter what your ultimate life choice is then you will start to do better with challenges. It's when people start to say to themselves like, oh, why is this happening to me? Oh, what's going on here? Well, this is life. Like life is not always positive. There's positives and negatives. That's the joy of the ebbs and flows of life. People think about this idea. I love the reminder of this too shall pass, but I feel like it's often brought up when people are talking about bad things. They're going through a difficult time. They're going through a loss or something like that. This too shall pass. But also remember that in the good times, when things are great and amazing and life is fantastic, that's going to pass too. So cherish that. Be grateful for that. Live in the moment that you have. But that's where I think Stoicism can help, because at the end of the day, we know that resilience is going to help us. And whether we're in good times or in bad times, we can cherish the moment that we're in because there's value in whatever's happening in that moment. It's a lesson or it's a win. And either way, it's good.
It's a worldview that's very necessary, I think, in today's times where we have a lot of events going on that seem, on a societal scale to be a cause of like despair and hopelessness. And we're like, the planet's going to be too warm or whatever in 100 years. Like, what's the point? And especially we see that in a lot of people our age, where there's just these big world picture events. You talked about politics a little bit, things like of that nature, which I'd have to argue are pretty negative just in nature at face value. And so when we're faced with that, we kind of curl up and say, why is this happening to us? Nothing matters. And I think Stoicism is kind of, in large part, an antidote to that. Because if you can, in the small day-to-day things, say, oh, this didn't go my way, here's a lesson I learned from it, or oh, here, this did go my way, awesome, let's see what happens tomorrow. By doing that in the small day-to-day things, you're eventually able to build up to that worldview to where you're seeing these large-scale events that are political in nature, or just encompass the whole society, and you're like, that's okay, I can deal with that. This might affect me negatively or positively, either way I'm okay, I can deal with that. And I also had to chuckle when you mentioned airports, because the two places that I have found most make me realize that I have changed mentally are airports and moving. Both of
Yeah.
those are big experiences that I've gone through before I discovered Stoicism, and I've gone through afterwards. And I'm like, wow, my worldview has changed drastically. I used to be somebody who was very irritable when it came to airports and moving, and now I'm like, that's whatever, you know. We're probably going to be here for a couple hours more than we should be, but that's okay. It's all good. So I just had to chuckle when you mentioned that. But it's even in the silly examples like that, or ones that you can chuckle at, it's all highlights just the importance of your worldview. And I think Stoicism is a very important worldview, especially in light of developments in the world today. Today, we do need more resilience. That's one of the things that I think is most important that we need more of. And I think Stoicism is a key to resilience because that's one of the core tenets. It's not, one of the four virtues, but I think it's a tenet that's inherent in all of the virtues is that resiliency aspect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. I do think that there is a reason that Stoicism is growing. Like the interest in Stoicism is definitely growing. And we had a conversation with Donald Robertson on our podcast, and he talked about, which is something I definitely agree with, is the fact that why he believes that people are coming to Stoicism is because they're not trusting of a lot of the institutions that we traditionally put trust in. So whether that's a political, whether that's the leadership, there's a distrust across the board there. There's distrust in education. There's distrust in religious organizations. Like people just don't really have those old institutions that they could depend on anymore. And what we're doing is people are going internal. They want a philosophy for themselves. If I can't depend on the church to properly guide me, or the government to properly guide me, or my education to properly guide me, well, what do I do then? And there's this very much this feeling of lost that I think people have and people are struggling with. We're not knowing what to do, not knowing what the next step. And I think that is why philosophy is having such a resurgence, is this idea that you're armed with these tools, and then you've got the roadmap of how to move forward, how to make decisions, how to kind of like live a life of tranquility. Because that's, imagine what everyone wants. It's just a peaceful, smooth flowing life. And I think that is why philosophy is having such a resurgence in kind of the recent years.
Something that social media has done a lot with these institutions as well as kind of expose their downsides, and those get labeled as conspiracies and whatnot. But because they're kind of everywhere and a lot more people can see them, it's provoking thought around these institutions, like you said, education, or I don't know, healthcare and whatnot. And because people often seek external like a cure externally, or an antidote to their problems externally, and now they're kind of being matched with these conspiracies and these downsides of these institutions on social media. Now it's kind of saying, oh, where is there to go? Where can you go? There's really no way out that you can go, so you have to go deep into here in order to figure out where the basis of your problems is going to be solved. And that's the big thing with Stoicism. And you did mention traveling, and something that's interesting about traveling is the idea of wanderlust, and how Stoics were not against traveling if it was, to learn and to explore and to kind of enrich your life in ways that you can't in your, where you're living. But they were against it if you were simply traveling to escape yourself, or to escape your environment because you weren't making the best of it there. You can always make the best of your environment wherever you are, and simply traveling just to get away from that is not the best antidote. That's what Stoics argued. Now, granted, there's something that people talk about where they're like, oh, if you're depressed and then you go on vacation for 3 days and then you're happy, you're not actually depressed. You're just not, living the best life back at home. And so Stoicism is a great fix to that. It's if you realize that as soon as you go on I don't know, a cruise to the Bahamas and you're super happy, you're like, oh, beach turtles and good food and whatnot. And then you go back to your town or your city and you're like, oh, this sucks. It's all a mindset. It's all internally. It's because you're looking for an antidote that exists outside of your control. And so once you start, and like you said, you used to really live thinking you were in control of everything and that you could kind of manipulate everything to work for you. We've all been there. And it's kind of a harsh reality to understand that that's not the case, that there's a lot of things that we have to let go of. And letting go is very difficult, whether you're, stoically realizing you need to let go of something, or you're not given a choice and something happens in your life and you're forced to let go. But letting go of the things you can control and then realizing it all comes back to you is where the change kind of starts.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting too is, this is something I thought about when I first started traveling as a digital nomad, was what am I running from? What am I like trying to escape? And and then because I didn't think it was anything, but I still like, I think what it was kind of the monotony of my, like, I was, I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida. I went to Gainesville for college, and then I went back to Jacksonville. So I was very much like in the same place a lot, just in Florida for the most part. And I did a fair amount of traveling. I tried to get out and travel as much as I could. I went multiple cross-country road trips and different trips to Canada and Mexico and things like that, but not really outside of my bubble. And I said, look, I gotta get out, because it was about experiencing other cultures and experiencing how other people live, that which I thought was going to be this whole life shifting thing. And I guess in a sense it was, but why it was life shifting for me is because as I traveled around and lived in a bunch of different cultures, not just visited them for a week, but really go and live in places for months, was I noticed that across the globe, everyone's basically the same. Everyone's pursuing the same thing. We're all trying to just provide for our families, give ourselves a nice, comfortable life, and that's it. And that to me was like, very like weird to see it, right? To travel the world to see this thing that I truly already knew. At the end of the day, we're all human beings. We are made for one another. We are made to have interaction and community with one another. And so wouldn't it make sense that we're all kind of pursuing the same thing and we're all heading in the same direction? And I just mean like that direction might look different to each and every one of us, but the idea is basically the same. We're just trying to pursue a good life. We're trying to live happy. And I do think that once we start to realize some of the things in our life that take away that happiness aren't as important as we truly think they are, that's when we really starts to like kickstart. And I think that that's what traveling did for me as well. Because, when you travel, there's only so much stuff you can bring. There's only so much stuff you can have. And, I was definitely someone that when I was getting my corporate job, getting a bunch of money and paying out bonuses every few months and things like that, like I was buying some shit and it wasn't bringing me any closer to happiness. It wasn't until it was meeting people and interacting with individuals from different cultures and different backgrounds and learning is what ultimately made me happy.
Yeah, I'm kind of, trying to draw a parallel here. I think the institutions that we mentioned, like education, government, don't teach us that. They don't teach us that everybody is the same. Everybody has kind of the same end goal of just a peaceful, fulfilling life. And that's something that philosophy does. Philosophy, the end goal of any school of philosophy, if you're talking, depending on what like the field is, obviously metaphysics probably isn't talking about, how to live a fulfilling life, but that's the end goal. Is like it may look different for everybody. Everybody might have a different personal definition of what a peaceful life is, but the goal, the words are the same. And I think that's one of the aspects I think makes philosophy so attractive nowadays, is that it is kind of the great equalizer where everybody's just trying to get to the same goal, versus education or government want to tell people that they're different, and that causes a lot of social rifts and things that we probably don't want to get into today, for lack of time sake. But one aspect of, the nomadic lifestyle that you talk about, and we've talked about with previous guests who also kind of live a similar lifestyle, is minimalism. And you just brought it up. One of the things that plagues society today is possessions possessing us instead of the other way around. And I think that's a product again of the rat race. Is, when you're competing for those corporate jobs and that security, right? Your status is dependent upon your possessions. Like, oh, I have this top skill job, so I get to drive this nice car and have this nice house, so I must be worth something. When that's not really true whatsoever, because if you're a miserable person on the inside and you still possess all those things, your life isn't that great. So your status doesn't really mean much in that sense. So I'm just curious how your journey has been with minimalism as a nomad. You know, you mentioned it briefly in how, in terms of how it's changed, but how has your mindset towards possessions changed as you've traveled more and more?
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely had a stint there where I was trying to do the minimalism challenge, give stuff away and sell stuff. And that was something that my wife and I did almost every weekend, kind of leading up to us leaving the country. Um, but for me, it really came, I think that once I sat down and was truly honest with myself, like I definitely used possessions as a way to validate myself as a successful person, as a smart person, as whatever I needed to be validated on. Um, and I think it goes back to that, wanting and valuing the opinions of others. I wanted other people to like me or think I was this type of way or lived this kind of life or whatever, because I valued their opinion. And as you know, and Stoicism talks repeatedly about not valuing the opinions of others in almost any regard. So that was a big piece for me. Is like, look, I don't care. People can want to be around me or not. People can want to work with me or not. That was one thing I struggled with, I'd say, is in entrepreneurship. I thought you had to kind of present this polished version of yourself whenever you're going to a pitch meeting or trying to get clients or anything like that. I have to be dressed perfectly and everything about my hair and face has to be perfect. And at the end of the day, I just decided, I was like, I'm the value. And if people don't want to work with me, that's fine. Then we don't work together, no matter what I'm wearing. And so I think I got over that, this idea of possessions, because I just didn't want to spend the money. I was dumping a bunch of money into new companies, but also I just realized, I was like, what am I doing this for? Like, why do I need to go buy this watch or have this brand of t-shirt or whatever? Like, I just do that for other people. I'm perfectly equally comfortable in a white t-shirt as I am, a fancy one, and it doesn't make a difference. So I think for me, it just became this realization of like, I'm performing for a lot of people. I'm playing a character, and like maybe I'm not being honest with myself. So I think there is some deep questioning I had to do on myself, is why am I even having these desires? And then at the end of the day, it came down to, I'm trying to do something that other people want me to do, or what I think they want me to do. Um, and that's just not really what it is. So I guess that's where I kind of realized it. But, to me, even now, because it's been, we were traveling for a while. Every 3 months, we had to move to a different country. And now we've very much settled down in Panama, and this is our home now. So we're kind of back into that life of like, well, now we have a house. We put furniture in it? Do we buy stuff? We need different types of clothes? And like, but my wife and I, we sit there and have these conversations of like, really, how much do we need this thing? Like, do we really need to buy this? And like, so we still are more diligent, I'd say, about not just rushing to, it's also the space we have between us and an Amazon warehouse is also helpful. When you can order something and have it to your house by the end of the day, that usually makes it a little easier to buy it. But yeah, I would say that just asking myself those questions, and as before I started doing the business consulting, I did kind of help people with like their personal finances. And one thing I would try and tell people, when they're buying something new, and whether this is a $10 thing or $1,000 thing, it doesn't matter. But, to really be strict with your money, if you're trying to be strict with it, I always do something where if I can't buy it twice, I don't want to buy it at all. Like if the price wasn't double to me, so like if it's a $10 item, if it was, would I buy it for 20? If I would, then I really want that thing. And that thing really means a lot to me if I'm willing to pay double the price for it. So that was just kind of an easy one for me. And now I do that every time and make those decisions very quickly. And I just think it makes my life a little easier, and it's less stress. Like I think things are literally just stress on your brain. Like when you have stuff, it's just more things you have to think about and more things that you have to deal with. And the less stuff you have, the better, in my opinion.
I think the idea of having things being stressful is the exact reason why when you have a clean room, it's a lot more peaceful than when it's messy, is because you see all these things on the floor and you're like, oh, my space, like it feels loud. You know what I mean? You see your
Hmm.
messy room and it feels like there's this noise everywhere when obviously that's not true. But it's kind of the same way when you get rid of a lot of things, then you're like, oh, I really only have this and this. Your mind just feels very peaceful. I think inherently we have this nature that we want to make the people around us happy, but we often get that confused with impressing them and making them think that we are, we want to be liked, obviously. So we want to kind of put on a facade that may not be who we are in order to be liked and appreciated by the people around us. And now more than ever, that's a huge issue with social media. It's so easy to do that. It's easy to Photoshop yourself. It's easy to just live two separate lives. And if you've ever been around somebody who's an influencer with a lot of followers, and you know what they're like on Instagram or on social media, and then you meet them in person and you're like, this is not at all what I was expecting. It's because I think it takes a lot more effort to own things and to present things to people than rather just being content with yourself. I think his name's Christian Bale, the guy who's Batman and
Mhm.
American Psycho and whatnot. He still drives like a 2006 Toyota ton or like Tacoma or whatever. It's just this, really old but very reliable car. And he's like, that's why I drive it, is because it's reliable. Like I don't need a new car. And I think he's a great example of kind of a stoic outlook on having a lot of or the ability to own possessions. I mean, he has all the money that he could ever need. And he's just very humble about it. He's like, I don't need to show it to anybody. I don't need people to see. Like, I'm content with who I am. And so that inner peace and that inner contentness is so powerful once you really obtain it.
Yeah, I'm ready for the day when that is the flex and not the Lamborghini. Like, oh, I don't need a Lamborghini. I'm driving a 1997 Pinto. Like that to me is what the flex should be. That should be the thing that people are reaching towards, but they're not. They're reaching for the Lambo or the whatever. And yeah, I think that it's such a powerful place to be. When you can like realize that you are completely detached from those sort of influences and from that sort of like the need to look a certain way or present yourself a certain way.
I think that's the problem with like role models and celebrity in today's society. Seneca talks about how our mentors, like we should be able to envision ourselves as them and be fine with that. Like if the people we choose to be our role models should be people where if we did 100% of their actions, we said 100% of what they said, we would be happy. We'd be content with that. And I think a lot of people confuse that messaging with like people they see who are movie stars or celebrities or whatever in the public sphere and they have nice possessions. They're like, okay, I would be fine living with them with that lifestyle, but they don't check, what the mindset is, what the message is under the hood, how they're doing, how the engine's running. And I think that's one thing that Stoicism clearly highlights is that throughout all the possessions, everything that, really we don't leave with when we leave the earth, it doesn't matter. All that matters is that mindset. And that's why it is so powerful. Because we live, well, I mean, any society, if you have a Lamborghini, that thing can be taken away from you in seconds. You know, you can put all that effort into getting that nice possession, that nice watch that you circled that you've wanted for 20 years. You bought it, boom, it's gone. You broke it, or something like that happens. That doesn't happen with a mindset. When you
Mm.
spend a lot of time working with a mindset, it's not something that can be taken away from you within 30 seconds because you've worked so hard to have it. It's going to maintain with you through challenges, through bad times, and through good times. It's not going to be something that you can break either. So that's the inherent, I think, if there's an argument to be made in terms of the value of mindset versus possessions, it's that right there. Mindset can't be taken away from you. If you work really hard at it, it's going to consistently be there for you always. So why not spend the time, put in that effort to have that, indomitable mindset of your life, which is that
Mhm.
mindset, because then you can be content whether you're living on the street in a cardboard box or you are driving that Lamborghini. You're content because you're okay with what's going on in here, not what's outside. And I think that's something that we did an episode on Stoic minimalism and how we can combine the concepts of Stoicism and minimalism. And I think that's what it is we don't need to discard all of our possessions, but we need to make sure that we work on our mindset more than we work on gaining possessions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too with mindset, it's the thing that, when you start it, when you get it, it just keeps getting more and more valuable over time. Whereas most things, aside from maybe collectibles or whatever, but most of the things you buy are just deteriorating and becoming less and less valuable as you use them. But a mindset is something that becomes more and more valuable as you use it, as you grow it, as you tweak it, as you change it. It just gets more and more valuable. It fits more and more into your lifestyle and into your the life that you're living. And so
Well, and when you pass eventually, we're all gonna die. And once you die, no one's gonna be talking about the amount of cars you had. No one's gonna be like, yeah, man, he was so cool. He had like 10 Lamborghinis and an Aston Martin and a huge house. And everyone's gonna be like he was a really good guy. He was always helping people in need. That's what lasts. The I don't know who said this. I don't even think it's Stoic, but it said the quote goes, it's the goal is not to live forever, it's to create something that does. And I
mm,
think the best way to create, a legacy or like a last name that lives forever is by being content with what you have and by not focusing on the possessions, but on focusing on the one thing that we do possess, and that's, you know, the control of our own soul and of ourself, and how we can express that outward to others. Being stoic, we've talked about this before. What we questioned, it could be the fifth stoic virtue, but kindness. How stoicism is ultimately built around, you know, being kind to others and being just a very gentle and caring person. And that's something that's very big with, you know, you see a lot of people, they would choose a Lamborghini over helping somebody on the street. They were like, oh, I mean, I'll put myself first, but they take it to the extreme. Obviously, we should always put our own well-being first, but it gets to the point where once you kind of practice obtaining material items, you're always putting your own self before someone who really will need it. And so if you're always being kind and being stoic, you'll have 10 cents and you'll give someone nine. You know, you'll give someone nine of those 10 cents because they need it more than you, or because it's just the right thing to do. And that's what Stoics would do. It says, you know, I will empty out my pocket so somebody else can eat if it means I can't. And that doesn't mean they're not taking care of themselves, because internally they have taken care of themselves. They are content with who they are. I think we kind of have to distinguish that line of, you know, putting others before yourself and taking care of yourself. They're two different things, and you can absolutely do both at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's definitely possible. And I think, you know, yeah, there is a kindness aspect to Stoics. I think because they call you, you know, we do live in a community, we do live amongst others. So, you know, it's not a philosophy that just looks at how to serve yourself. It is ultimately like you are bettering yourself and you are being kind of the best version of yourself so that you can serve the whole, so that you can serve the community. And I think that aspect of kindness and generosity and looking after your fellow man is something that we are called to do. I guess I would kind of file it under justice. Like, I think that is the just thing to do. I think that is the right thing to do. And that's where I think, you know, Stoicism comes back to all the time is just doing the right thing. Like, in any moment, you can always do the right thing. It's just a matter of whether you choose to or not. And that's the part that we get to control. So I do think that focusing on the right thing right now is what really matters.
It's one thing that we talked about with Benny, is that the label of Stoic doesn't really, you know, serve you well, because a Stoic is a good person. So instead of, you know, going out and saying, oh, I need to be Stoic, what we've kind of concluded is you just need to go out and say that I'm going to be a good person. And that usually is going to correlate with a lot of Stoic values. So even if you're somebody who hasn't necessarily read Stoicism or is, you know, aware of all of the Stoic concepts and Stoic principles, Stoic tenets, virtues, whatever you want to call it, just going out and being a good person, if you do that, you analyze your habits, and then you actually go and read, you know, meditations or something like that, you're like, wow, you know, I'm actually pretty aligned with what's going on here just by being a good person. And I think that's, you know, the beauty of the four virtues, is that if you are courageous, if you have a lot of self-discipline, right? If you have a lot of wisdom and you go out and you act justly, you're going to probably be a good person. I'd be pretty hard pressed to believe that you go out and implement those four things that you're not going to be a good person. So that's the thing about labels there, is that, you know, you don't have to label yourself as a Stoic or anything like that. It's just being a good person, because there aren't enough of those today. So if we could just add more good people to the world, that's probably a net positive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think too that, you know, and goodness, you know, I think has, you know, goes just to go back to social media, I guess, a little bit, these ideas of like, you know, a good person has to do this, you know, give away $100,000, do all these crazy things, because we do see these sort of like surprise deals on social media and whatnot. But like, it's really the simple stuff. It's really just, you know, to me, I always think of the idea of treating, you know, and this comes up going back to the airport example. Of course, in an airport, people are stressed out, people are angry, flights get canceled, they start yelling at the staff. And like, and that's the point when you feel that tension, when you feel people and the emotions start to rise, that's when it really takes a strong person to be kind, because you want to start that planting those seeds of kindness around to just kind of bring the whole mood down. So I think, you know, how you act in those stressful situations, in those situations that people usually say, yeah, it's okay if you yell and scream and act like an ass. Like, no, it's not. It's not okay to be that way, because you don't know what the other person's going through on the other side of the conversation. You don't know how their life has been or the challenges that they're facing. And why would you want to just shovel on more shit when you can be kind and you could be nice and just approach it with some civility and some kindness and move forward that way. And every single time I've done that over yelling and screaming, I've always had a better outcome. So I think that is one thing to think about when in doubt, just be kind, and that's gonna always win for you in the end.
And there's a lot of benefits to that. I mean, one, you're acting on the wisdom, or I guess the justice aspect of Stoicism, right? Is realizing what the more rational thing to do is. I mean, think about it. It's not the flight attendant's fault the flight got canceled. So there really is no justice in being rude to them. And it's also you're being wise and realizing that. But that's besides the point. You're utilizing the Stoic virtues to assess a situation. But also something that there's a quote by Marcus Aurelius that says, "Before you judge a man, I'm paraphrasing here because I'm like you. We know so many quotes that we kind of just paraphrase them, but it's like before you judge someone, make sure you're not guilty of the same thing you're going to critique them of, right?
Yeah.
So it's basically don't be a hypocrite. And so if you were in a situation where someone, you were getting mad at somebody and you were guilty of the exact same thing, that's horrible. And so you said you judge people before we even get to know them. And so I think the biggest thing about the kindness aspect of Stoicism is before we decide to get upset with somebody, or not even upset, but before we try to judge them, we should try to get to know them first. We should try to really understand what's going on. And that's something that's talked about very widespread. That was in my sermon this morning at my 11 a.m. service. And I kind of wanted to bring it into the podcast because there are so many, for me, connections between my religion and Stoicism. It's crazy. I've just been seeing them more and more as I delve deeper and deeper into each one. But Stoics would really be all for understanding somebody as a whole before we decide to judge them. And Stoics weren't necessarily against judgment because we need to have good judgment in situations and we need to be able to judge people in order to be in a good situation with them. But if we're judging someone for their behavior or for their actions, it's really important to understand the bigger picture and what's going on. And that takes a lot of courage to do, is to sit down with somebody and really have those difficult conversations. Like, hey, what's really going on? Like, you've been off. I really want to know what's going on. That takes courage. And so all of these Stoic principles and these cardinal virtues can be applied to every situation. They are present everywhere. And so to Ren's point, we've paralleled being Stoic with being a good person. And like every person does, they have their set values that makes them a good person. And for us, it's Stoicism. And I think you would probably agree. It's these four cardinal virtues that are flexible and can be applied to every situation that makes somebody a good person.
Yeah, I mean, as far as, Stoics do also tell us to kind of, temper our use of the terms good and bad, right? Like to not label things necessarily as good and bad. And I think when it comes to people, right, we like to think that there's one version of a good person. But as we certainly know, culturally across the world, there's certain things that someone could do in one country that if they did it in a different country, they would not be seen as a good person. So there is some things that are culturally relevant when we come to like this idea of good and bad. And so I think that gets a little difficult in trying to kind of define it. But at the end of the day, what I think we can't do is judge people too much because we don't know everything. It's impossible to know everything about everyone. Like no one knows the internal struggles that we all each individually go through. So I think it's hard to judge people too much. I think a better approach sometimes, at least for me, is to try and remind when I see someone acting like what I might be considered a bad person or someone doing something that's out of line. I try to remind myself when I did something similar as well. So when I was, because I've had certainly a non-stoic history, and there's been plenty of times that I've been the asshole yelling at the flight attendant or yelling at the person that doesn't deserve it. And so that's where I try to practice it, is again, always coming back to myself and just saying like, if I see someone, driving like a jerk or acting rudely to a service person or whatever, I've done that before. And now I don't. And it gives me empathy for the other person. Like, hey, they're still struggling. They're just not as far down the path as I have gone. They don't have the training that I have. And then also just to remind myself of the growth that I've had, of the journey that I've been on, of the ways that I've changed. Because that makes me feel good too. So yeah, I really try and it's really tough. It's not something that's easy, because talking about people, gossiping, all that stuff is fun. There's whole reality shows related to or devoted to that. And so it's definitely something that is built inside of us and is a part of us, this need or this want to kind of gossip about people or talk about people. But as soon as you can kind of temper that, like I try to lean into temperance with that one, because I'm never going to get away from it 100%. Sometimes my wife and I just want to talk shit about someone. That's what we want to do, and that's okay. But I just try to like not overdo it and not put too much on it, or at least try and turn it back on myself at some point to say, yeah, that person is acting kind of like a jerk, but I also acted like a jerk a few weeks ago when I did X, Y, or Z. So that's how I kind of look at judgment. It's something that I guess, avoid as much as I can.
Yeah, it's like Marcus Aurelius said, be strict with yourself and tolerant with others. And
Bam.
yep. And I think the secondary aspect of that is when you do that and you're tolerant and you pair it with kindness, the person who did something who was rude or whatever that offended you could have made you upset. If you reinforce that by reciprocating anger or another emotion, they're just going to be like, oh, I was vindicated in my response. I'm going to go do that to another person. But when you're tolerant with them and you show kindness in the face of them saying a rude comment to you or something like that, they're like, wow, well, maybe I shouldn't do that. It doesn't get a rise out of somebody. Maybe I should be kind as well. Now, obviously, that's wishful thinking, and not everybody who is an asshole is going to think that. But even if you can change 1 out of 10 people throughout your day who go and do something where you could have reacted negatively, but instead you react positively, and so they take that as a lesson, then you're doing your job in terms of building a community. That's the secondary aspect that I always try and keep in mind. I love your perspective of thinking of times when you did the same thing. For me, how that takes shape and how I have tried to practice tolerance is me imagining how my kind words or my kind actions then change the mindset of the person who did something to me, because then I'm creating a positive impact in my community. And so I would much rather take the rude comment, whatever, but at least I can reciprocate something that hopefully builds community rather than builds resentment or reinforces the behavior that I disapproved of in the first place. It's a much better, just thinking rationally, it's a much better way to react.
Yeah, and just to kind of like double click on that point is you're going to, in the scenario where you're describing, right, where someone's acting rude, says something rude to you, they're anticipating that you're going to be rude back. And when you're not, that gets their attention. And at the end of the day, you want to get people's attention. And if you want to try and influence the situation in any way, so that just going just from Jump Street, they're expecting you to come out with with the claws out, and you approach them in a softer way, like they're going to automatically react in a nice way. And there was a time actually traveling where our flight got canceled and we were trying to make it to a certain city at a certain time. We had a wedding we were going to, and I'm just telling the guy, like, he's behind the counter, everyone's yelling at him, he's just like getting just chewed out by all sorts of people. And I walk up to him and I was just like, so, hey man, how you doing today? And just like literally had like a 2-minute conversation about just him and how his day has been. And then I was like, look, this is what's going on. Can you help me out? And he's like, I'm going to get you on the plane. You got it. And like just the idea of me approaching him in a way that he was not anticipating. He was anticipating me to come in hot and angry and pissed off. But because I came in differently, the whole mood changed, and he helped me out, got us on the plane, and we got to where we needed to be. So I just think that idea of kind of doing the unique thing. If you want to have unique circumstances and you want to live a unique life, you got to do things differently than others. And if everyone's getting angry, you should be the person being calm, cool, and collected.
Well, and this is very present in debates, I guess, on hot topics, political issues, social issues, or whatever. It's very easy to be passionate about, a stance, and that's great. You should be passionate about what you believe in. But then to go into a debate, swinging right away, just like bam, bam, my thoughts, you're kind of hammering the other person with what you believe in. And then if you're matched with that, you never get anywhere. There's no compromising, there's no seeing other perspectives. That's why this country's not going anywhere. But I didn't say that, but I totally said that because that's what I really believe, especially with politics. But if you meet that energy with just a calm and like, hey, I want to hear everything that you have to say. I'm going to respect everything you have to say. I want to understand it on a deeper level. People are kind of like, they stop mid swing. They're like, okay, hold on. And then they start to be like, I'm really sorry. I've had this happen to me multiple times where I'm about to talk to somebody about a very heated issue, but I deal with it very calmly because I don't want to argue. And usually you find out that you have a lot more in common with that person than you think, even if you're on opposite sides. But because we've never really been able to sit down and calm and collectively talk about it, we're never realizing that. But once we kind of are able to do that, it's so amazing what you realize about the other side or the opposing view or the other person that you're talking to on the other side of the table. And we make so much progress. Even if we don't end up agreeing, we still progress as people, which I would argue is far more important than agreeing on an idea.
Yeah, you're not gonna convince people. I mean, I learned this the hard way because I tried to convince a bunch of people to change their minds on topics that they weren't going to do. So you're not going to, and if you are, you're definitely not going to do it in one conversation over lunch. Like it's not, it's going to happen over months or years. We don't change our minds in an afternoon. Typically, it usually takes a while. So yeah, I think it is kind of a fool's errand when it comes like going back to time, like it to me, I like I said, I used to do that a lot. I used to get in, I love, and I still love debate at this point. I still love pulling apart complex issues because I want to understand what other people think because that's just my interest in the way other people think. But at the end of the day, having the more, let's say, political debates or fights or whatever. I mean, I guess they're all fights now at this point. That is just a fool's errand. It's a waste of time to me, and it doesn't bring any sort of joy or anything to my life. And if anything, it just causes rifts that are unnecessary. Because people do feel really passionate about their beliefs for whatever reason, and when you start challenging them, like you're gonna impact your relationship with them, and so that's kind of something you have to accept if you're gonna enter into those sort of arenas. But yeah, I think that the idea of just general, like, we like to say in our rooms when we have these spaces on X that, people can come in and they can offer up any opinion they want as long as they're coming in good faith. If they're coming in good faith with a goal of adding value to the room, carrying along the conversation, adding their perspective to the menagerie of different perspectives, that's great. But if they're coming in just to take over the conversation or force people to believe a certain thing or talk about a certain topic, like they're not coming in good faith. They're not coming in as a part of their community. They're trying to pull the community into another place. So that's where I always kind of lean to is like, are you coming into the conversation with good faith? Are you coming here to learn, to share your perspective, not just to yell and scream or tell me why I'm wrong?
I think part of that too is within our passions towards our beliefs. If we're challenged just once, even if the person is coming in with good faith and just wants to have a conversation, not change your mind, just, see what your opinion is, because they challenged our opinion on the face of it just by disagreeing with us, we assume that's not good faith. That's something that Mateo and I both commonly ran into is when we go into conversations, we try our best to be those people who are of good faith. And, I might disagree with you, but at least I just want to see your perspective because I want to learn and I, would just want to listen. But people, because they are challenged, just find it as something that's threatening and not in good faith. And I think that speaks to just kind of the insecurity aspect of this is that once you come to a place where you kind of find your set of moral values, you've shaped your identity around those moral values, and you're really secure in those values in your mindset, then being challenged isn't really a threat, right? Like we could come on the podcast here and we have people on all the time who disagree with us on certain issues of Stoicism because, we're reading the same book, but we have different interpretations. It's not a threat. It's not something where we're like, whoa, 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 whoa. It's no, I mean, we're learning. And that's the ultimate goal is we seem to, as a society, become distracted from that and view a challenge to our viewpoint as something that's a threat to our identity or somebody attacking us when that's not the case. It's actually the complete opposite. It's an opportunity to grow. It's an opportunity to learn and an opportunity to grow. And it's something, I don't know if it's a direct Stoic teaching or something like that, but that's just something that's wise is being able to be challenged, to accept other people's viewpoints, to be able to, have to defend your viewpoint. That's something that's the quality of a wise person is saying, wow, there's a lot of value in this. This isn't something that's threatening whatsoever.
As you know, that is a great point because I think it's definitely true what you're saying, which it has to do with that idea of kind of insecurity. And I do think, sadly, though, that has more to do with usually untreated trauma. Like I'm someone who is in therapy, have been in therapy for many years now, for various reasons. I consider therapy to be something like, changing the oil in your car. Like if you're going to go to the gym and work out your muscles, you got to go to a therapist sometimes and work out your brain. So, and unfortunately, like as I've learned that, and I kind of see myself doing this a lot in my younger years when I was very insecure and had, some issues that I hadn't dealt with and traumas that I hadn't unpacked. When I felt exactly what you said, which is, yeah, when someone's challenging me and saying, hey, you're wrong about this because of A, B, and C reason, well, then now you're attacking me. You're saying I'm wrong. You're saying I'm a bad person or something. And I just jump to all sorts of conclusions. And I feel like that's really what's going on when it comes to a lot of these sort of infighting sort of things, whether it's, I guess politics is the easiest one to pick on, but people disagree across the spectrum. And I think civil disagreement is something that we don't learn at all ever. And unfortunately, it's really sad because it is a lot of the communication skills that we should have in order to have effective discourse with one another. We just aren't taught that. But unfortunately, yeah, there is a lot of things where people really internalize their beliefs because they don't know themselves, basically. I think this is what it comes down to, is you don't know yourself. So you attach yourself to some belief, and when that belief gets challenged, now you're under attack. And that is the like kind of psychology side of it. But and this is where philosophy comes in, is you get to know yourself. You get to learn about yourself more, and you become more secure in yourself and who you are and what you represent. And it's not necessarily that, just to take it super easy, like, oh, I think this TV show is the best show on TV. Like, if I wrap my identity in that and then someone tells me why that show is shit, I'm going to feel some type of way about it. But if I'm not wrapping my identity in that, and I'm Brendan, who happens to also like this TV show, it doesn't matter what someone else thinks about it. It doesn't matter how they feel about it. So I really think that these are deep, untreated wounds, unfortunately, that just aren't getting dealt with. And it's sad that we have, that's the state of affairs that we're in. Like, mental health and therapy and these sort of things just aren't viewed as things that should be necessary in life. They're privileges in life more than anything. But I really do think that if people were more comfortable in themselves and more secure in themselves, that these sort of infighting, argumentative BS things just wouldn't be that big of a deal.
I couldn't agree with you more. And there's a few points that you both had actually mentioned that I want to touch on. So that first one, right, is getting really comfortable with yourself so you don't take things as personally. That's kind of the stepping stone of Stoicism, is diving internally and finding yourself. And once you do that, you become so confident in who you are and that you're able to be good that you don't really care what other people say. You don't get too attached to anything. And I think that's one thing, is we get very attached to an idea or an identity or an object, and it sort of becomes what we want to be, right? We attach it to our identity, and we don't allow ourselves to be kind of this free flowing, like Bruce Lee said, be like water, right? We don't allow ourselves to be like that. We become very fixed and we become very stuck. And so when someone tries to push us over, everything that we have falls over with it, and it's very hard. The thing about education and civil disagreement and learning that I kind of was making this connection with is, we're taught that learning kind of happens when we just agree with what we're told, right? That we learn, the teacher says something, we're like, okay, and that's how we learn. We're never taught that the best learning is, happens when you meet someone with a differing perspective. That's never taught in school. That way of thinking is hardly taught in school anymore, at least in America. And so when we deal with those things in real life, that's why we're not going to get anywhere, is because we're unfamiliar with it. And if we're unfamiliar with the idea that that's where we're going to learn, then we're never going to learn at all. And we're going to see someone, and that combined with someone thinking that they're attacking us personally because we're attaching ourselves to an idea or an opinion, that's the recipe for disaster right there. That's a recipe to stay a fixed person, to stay fixed in your views, and to never progress in your own opinions or in society at all.
Yeah, no, that's true. I love that idea too, where you're talking about is like free flowing versus fixed. Like you mentioned it, like I guess in the beginning it was more like relating it to the Bruce Lee thing of being like water. But yeah, I do think that as we, and I think this is also something that I've just developed over time. So maybe it's something that you get with age. I'm not really sure, but you know, not being so attached to the opinions of others, and we talked about this earlier, but that to me is really important. You know, if and that's what I feel like is kind of the worst part of the education system as the way it is now, is that it lays out one path. You do this and that's it. You go to school, you get A's, you go to college, you get more A's, you get a good job. And like there's not a whole lot of mix and match and play, and there's not a lot of creativity there. And which then requires that we learn to not be creative. Like they kind of like take creativity out of the equation. And whenever you can start really leaning into that a little bit more and start looking at things from different perspectives and trying things differently, that's where like a lot of the learning comes from for me, is just trying. You know, as an entrepreneur, that's part of the game, is just try, fail, and do that 10 more times until you get it right. No one gets it right the first time. No one just has a business, starts it today, and then turns it to $1 million next week, because they have so many failures along the way. And that's part of the journey, and that's part of it. And we just can't seem, you know, we're like afraid of failure. We're scared of it or something. And it's a part of it. It's part of the journey.
I think that's also part of the conditioning of school, is the fear of failure, right? Because if you get an F on a test, like you get made fun of, you know, your grade suffers, and that we could really get into the education system a lot, because Mateo and I both hate the education system in America and think it really needs to get reformed. But we'll keep it brief and just saying that there's a lot of the things that we're talking about that are negatives that we see in society are a product of the conditioning of the education system. And again, not to get, you know, too conspiratorial, but one of the main influences in the American education system, Rockefeller, said that we need a society of workers, not thinkers. And I think that's where we see the creativity diminished when it comes to schooling. So it's getting out of that rat race and kind of finding your own life philosophy, I think. And it's interesting to me that we don't teach philosophy in schools. Like the first time that you can really pick up philosophy, some high schools may teach it where it's a more bougie area of the country, but the first time that you run into philosophy largely is college. But you run into so many life experiences before you turn 18 where philosophy would be so helpful. And so that's why, you know, when I talk to people who are maybe just a little bit younger, who are 16 still in high school, it's reading is important. We mentioned that before, but read philosophy, because philosophy is the art of learning how to live fulfilled and learning how to live a peaceful life. And I would argue that that's more important than understanding science or understanding math or understanding history. Certainly, all of those are important and they will serve you. But what's the point of knowing when a certain event in history happened, or what the scientific theorem is, or what this algebraic concept is, when you are miserable on the inside and you don't know how to deal with life events? There's no point then. Like great, I know that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. That's awesome. Why do I feel so terrible inside? That's where a lot of people our age are at. That's the product of the education system. So not really a Stoic concept there, but we talked a little bit off air about the education system, and I think that's just something to note, is that one of the things that we need to emphasize, especially as a Stoic community, is picking up philosophy earlier, because a lot of the people we talk to are people who are in their 40s and they just discovered it like 5 years ago. And that's great, right? It's better that you discover it in your 40s or in your 30s than you never do. But imagine if we had a society where we taught these kind of concepts when you were growing up, when you're 16. And so we have people who start that journey so much earlier. Imagine how much, how much better society would be for that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I do think that is, I mean, you know, we call the industry now the self-help industry, which is a multi-billion-dollar book industry, but you know, that's all self-help is just taking from philosophy. Like self-help, most of the main self-help gurus are just taking old philosophy texts and revamping them for a modern audience, and that's what it is. So, but for some reason we feel like we don't need that stuff until we're in our late 20s, mid 30s, and we've got a family and we've got kids and we've got a job and we've got stressors, and then we're like, oh yeah, now maybe we need to help ourselves. But yeah, I completely agree. And that's one of the things that we are like passionate about over at Via Stoica, is just trying to bring these ideas to a younger audience, which is why I love so much what you guys are doing here, because I do think, I'm so incredibly grateful that I discovered these things in my 20s. But damn, I would have been a lot happier discovering them when I was 13, 14, 15, because I went through a whole mess of problems and challenges in my life then that I could have definitely used some Marcus Aurelius, whispering in my ear, instead of some other people I had influencing me at the time. But yeah, I completely agree. I do think that it should be something that is taught in schools and brought to schools. I think now, unfortunately, because of the way the system works, it's hard to start it now. So now it's got to be more of like a nonprofit front or something in that way, where you're going into schools. I don't know if it's ever going to be something that's taught in, at least not anytime soon, at like an elementary, middle school level, because it's just, it's an industry, unfortunately, that just doesn't have a lot of people. And if you are a major in philosophy, like, and you want to have a livable income, you're going to go teach at a university, because that's who pays. Elementary schools just don't have the money to pay philosophy teachers, unfortunately, even though that's probably what kids need more than some other subjects. But what do I know?
No, you're absolutely right. The thing that's very interesting about philosophy too is how it reaches people in different ways. And I kind of said this earlier, but like if you are teaching, philosophy and the idea of human nature just to kids, and if you're conditioning kids in that way rather than with what the education system is now, society's going to thrive, right? And that's where I'm with Ren on starting earlier, is we're started early into the education system and we're conditioned to think a certain way. But if we kind of are able to recondition, the younger generation in starting like that, and then they're conditioned to live their lives, I guess, stoically, for a lack of better terms, that would be amazing. Now, we realize this because it's all in our perspective. If we had lived our entire lives stoically, learning philosophy growing up, we would never know that it was so, it's worth so much. The reason we're realizing how much it's worth is because there's a huge lack of it in our generation now, and there has been for a little bit. Ryan Holiday's doing a great job kind of modernizing philosophy for our generations now, but there's still a lot of work to be done if we really want to make a societal impact with it. Something also that Ren mentioned about, and you both mentioned, is about failure and how we're kind of afraid of it. And Ren went into the education system, how we're kind of conditioned to be afraid of failure. A big thing is simply just with how comfortable we are, and we never have to do hard things. And if you never do anything hard, you're never going to fail. And so there's so many factors playing into why we're afraid to be uncomfortable and dive into these uncomfortable situations. And so if we can immerse ourselves in a philosophical, environment as we're younger, it's going to be a lot easier to just go out and challenge yourself whenever you want to, because you need more. And in order to grow as a person, you have to go through these roadblocks to get stronger.
Yeah, yeah, no, I completely agree with that idea of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. I had a teacher for both in seventh and eighth grade, and he was my English teacher. But I don't know, every once in a while, he was also very into like improv and that sort of stuff. So he would make us do improv during class. And like, if you're not familiar with improv, it's just like, you come up with various like little scenarios and you have to act them out. So it's all on the spot, all made up. So it's a lot of like, and as a kid, of course, you're standing in front of the class, you're trying to like be funny or do something entertaining. And so that's a lot of pressure. But like, I remember those days so much, because that's when I got comfortable with being uncomfortable, was like that feeling of like, oh shit, what am I going to say? What am I going to do? Okay. And then you go and do something and it either works or it doesn't. But either way, it's entertaining, because you either say something ridiculous or you do something funny. And like that happening to me over and over again. He's one of my like favorite teachers, and not because of the subject matter at all, but just because I learned from him like a life lesson of like, oh, like let's get uncomfortable. Let's get into a place where I don't know what I don't know what I'm doing, and let's see how I'm going to get out of it. And at the end of the day, I'm either going to learn something about myself, or I'm going to, have an enjoyable experience. And so I just think that this idea of like, I completely agree that we are kind of coddled in a sense too much, and like a little bit of like people, the Stoics talk about these voluntary discomforts. And I do think that is something to do every once in a while. When I travel, I try, and sometimes I travel, and I say, like, are we going to do it the grunge way? Are we going to stay in hostels and make it as cheap as possible? Or are we going to, like, maybe get a nicer place and kind of, so it's all about balance. But I do think that every once in a while, as a part of balance, you kind of inherently have to do the uncomfortable thing every once in a while. Life can't always be comfortable.
Yeah, and the reason for that is the mindset that you mentioned before of the why is this happening to me? Like, oh, why me? Why would XYZ do this to me? That I think comes from a result of just being used to being comfortable. When you're used to being comfortable and you're not challenged to face hardship, when hardship comes, because in life it has to, right? You're not going to go through life without experiencing hardship. Then you're like, oh, well, the last 5 years I've been so comfortable and have not had any challenges. Why is this happening now? I don't know how to deal with it. So that's the value of voluntary discomforts, to me, is that you never get comfortable enough to say, why me? Because if it constantly is happening to you, eventually you're either just going to keep hitting your head on the wall, like, oh my God, why is this happening to me? Or eventually you're going to come to realize, like, maybe this is a natural part of life. Maybe I just have to learn to deal with it. And that's that first, mindset shift that gears you towards what I would consider a stoic approach to challenges, which is finally embracing them, finally saying, good, this is happening to me, instead of why is this happening to me? That's we've talked a lot in terms of like big hyperbole of like, oh, this is life changing, but that truly is life changing, because that's one of the most natural parts of life is ups and downs, right? You're going to have great moments where you're very happy, but then you're also going to have moments that, cause you to lose that happiness or lose that experience or whatever, that are very challenging to get through. And even when you're practicing Stoicism, I think all three of us have gone through experiences since we found Stoicism where it's challenging to be Stoic. It's challenging to uphold those tenets. It's not something that's very, always smooth and always going to work and always going to be just something where I can say, well, here's this concept, here's this quote that Marcus Aurelius said, I feel better now. That's not how it works. That's very silly. But what does work is constantly training yourself through experience. And the way you do that is those voluntary discomforts, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of amor fati, like loving your fate, is my like go-to thing. If I have I've never really been into tattoos or interested in getting them, but I did get my wife's name tattooed on my finger when we got married. And the other thing I've considered doing is amor fati somewhere on my body, because I do feel like that is something that I constantly need to remind myself of. And it's such an unlock. Like when you get to that place and you're just like, no matter what happens to me, I love it, because I'm either going to learn something or it's going to be a wonderful experience. Either way, it's going to be a W. And when you can get to that point and you just want life to happen, things just become easier. Life is smoother flowing. And when it comes to this idea of challenges, like I now, and I don't know if it's just me being like a masochist or something, but like I love when things get difficult, because I've been studying Stoicism for so long. I'm like, well, now I get to put this shit into practice. Let's do it. Like every time I have something happen to me that is difficult, it's just like, now maybe not right away. Right away, I might be a little annoyed or pissed off or whatever, but eventually I get to that place where I'm like, this is supposed to happen because I have the training for this to happen. If I wasn't able to get through this challenge, it would have not been given to me. And that to me is like such a big unlock of like, I can get through this because it's here, it's ready for me, and I'm here and I'm ready to take it on.
I think another thing that is very awesome about challenges, it's very easy to appreciate it in retrospect. We're like, and that's if we make it through and learn something. If we never do, then we're always going to be resentful towards it. But there's this amazing, I think it's Morgan Freeman who's talking about it. If you're, asking, whatever you believe in, the universe, nature, God, whatever it is, and you say, oh, give me strength. You're not just going to get strength just like that. I mean, you can't just be strong. You can't just be gifted strength. You're going to be given trials and tribulations that are going to make you a stronger person in whatever aspect you wish. That's just how life works. And, whether you are whatever you believe in, I think there's definitely something, and the Stoics would call it capital N nature. We're all a part of it. We're all in sync with nature. We're all in accordance with it at all times. That is in control. It's in control of our fate. And that's why the Stoics had accepted the idea of loving their fate, is because they knew there was almost something predestined, but not predestined. It was just something that they couldn't control, that was just bound to happen. And so they were appreciative of everything that happened because they knew it was for a reason. And I've kind of struggled with this idea for a while, putting it into place with Stoicism is like like a higher force, right? Like I think Marcus Aurelius calls it providence, or providence. I don't remember what he says, but it's essentially this idea of like, they say the gods, they say nature, that whole idea of things that come in our way that we're unable to control, and we sort of just have to get through them regardless of if we want to or not, that make us stronger. But that's sort of an idea I've been juggling up for a little while, is do we attract our own challenges ourselves, or are they put, in our way by something else? That's not really a Stoic idea, but it's something that is not really touched on by Stoics, is like what they believed in is a higher power. If it was nature, if it was the gods, it's still something that's kind of a gray area for me. So I'm kind of curious what you think about it. I've just been always wondering, and as a Christian, I'm like, I don't know, Christian Stoicism, does it really make sense? Does it really add up? It's something that I've been pondering for a while. So I'm kind of curious what you think about it.
Oh yeah, that's a great question, and one that I've tried to talk to as many knowledgeable Stoics as I can, because I think it is an important one. For me, I think that that this idea that, first of all, you have to remember like the historical context of it. Like, the Christian Bible was not written when Stoicism was being talked about and discussed and things like that. So there is some theories and thoughts that some of the Christian texts were in fact influenced by Stoicism or other philosophy school of thoughts. And that's why you will see those overlaps and those common threads. And that to me is an important thing. Like anytime you see a commonality between schools of thoughts, whether that be religious or philosophical or anything else that has been around for that long, then you should probably pay attention to whatever that thing is. So I mean, I think that so as far as like exactly what happened, I don't know. I don't really have a strong answer, but I do feel like um, we have we have these things that we I lost my train of thought. Ask me the question again.
Yeah, I was kind of, it's more of I'm kind of losing my train of thought because it's so much to think about, but I guess
Yeah, I had one place I wanted to go, but I wanted to like
yeah,
take a detour and
the
then I forgot through the
the
detour.
Stoics refer to, nature and the gods and whatnot.
Mm.
I'm curious if you, and it's kind of a gray area even in the text because it's not touched on, it's mentioned, but it's not really defined. So I'm curious, like, do you think, the Stoics and the Amorphity, that they believed in something higher than themselves that wasn't just nature? Like, what is nature to them? I'm curious what you think that is or was for them, because I've been trying to figure it out for a while.
Yeah, no. Okay. So to me, I feel like, with the Stoics, they obviously sometimes they speak of nature, sometimes they speak of the gods, sometimes they speak of God. And I think that no matter what, at the end of the day, it depends on the writer itself, because that is the difference with, philosophy and religion is, religion, you follow a certain doctrine and that's the way it is. Whereas philosophy, I feel like you can kind of pick and choose, and it is not a religion. So you have people who are Stoics that are Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, every religion. And you have people who are Stoics that are atheist or agnostic and things like that. And that's fine across the board. So I think as a Stoic, though, I do believe that you have to have some sort of not necessarily higher power, but just acknowledgement that you're not the center of the universe, that something is of more importance than you. Now, whether that's karma or God or nature or any other God, there's like 3,000 different gods throughout history. So there's a lot of different ones that you get to pick from. But at the end of the day, you just know that there is some sort of higher thing. And like, I think the simplest one is community. Like I do believe in the fact that, and I think most religions would agree with this as well, is like at the end of the day, we want to love and care for our fellow brothers and sisters on earth. And I think that at the end of the day is what it comes down to, is if you're pursuing a life that is benefiting the whole and not hurting the whole, if it's good for the hive, it's good for the bee. And I truly believe that that is what the Stoics believe is now whether that we have this thing, I think you brought it up earlier, of do we attract our challenges, or are they put in our path? That kind of idea of determinism or not. I'm not really sure. I think, I still do believe in that, that idea that if it's humanly possible, then it's possible for you to do it, and that you ultimately do decide, in a sense, what your challenges will be based on the life decisions that you make. And now sometimes, of course, we don't have we can't see into the future, so you make a decision today without understanding the downstream effects of that decision. That's one thing. But at the end, but you are kind of making those choices for yourself, and those will lead to particular challenges. But again, like we've talked about throughout this conversation, challenges are a part of life. So you're going to have them no matter what flavor they are, what they look like, how they present themselves. We can't ever know until we're in the moment receiving that challenge. But I do believe that we receive challenges that we are prepared to take on. I do believe that there is a way through it. The obstacle is the way. And I do believe that when we receive these challenges, that we have the skills and the abilities to get through them.
Absolutely. I think it's kind of that self-help cliche that everything you need resides within yourself. It's just people aren't aware of everything they're capable of. It seems like to me, philosophy is kind of the key in like your mental toolbox. You're born with it. Like half of the toolbox is locked off. And I think once you discover philosophy and you really dive deep into working in yourself, and if we could call it maybe self-mastery, I think then you are providing yourself a key to unlock the other half. And then all of a sudden, like everything that you are capable of, you are aware of. And therefore, challenges, I think, don't even become challenges anymore. They become, like you said, they become tests. They become opportunities to say, all right, well, I've spent time working on myself. Here's where I prove that I've actually put in the work. Because people, you can say that you've put in the work, but then when you're faced with a challenge and you react the same way you did 2 years ago, you're like, all right, maybe I need to go back to the drawing board. Maybe I need to do something differently within my journey. So I think that's where it kind of resides for me, is that we attract challenges when we view them as challenges, but then when we view them as opportunities or tests, we don't necessarily attract them anymore. They're just there on our path. And every time is an opportunity to say, like, all right, testing myself today. Here's what the test looks like. Because, life would be so boring without them. Like if you got to go through life every day and everybody was nice to you and, things went your way all the time, people would say, oh, well, that would be so great. I don't think so. Because then what's the Seneca quote? You'd never be able to live up to your potential if you never face adversity. People who never face adversity don't know what their potential is, because they only know their identity when everybody is nice to them and everything is going their way.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept too. And this idea of like, when the shift happens, because as an infant, right, as babies, like we are just naturally like we're sponges, right? We're trying to absorb everything. We're trying to get everything from the earth that we can to learn, to understand, to grow. But at some point, that receive that information, instead of just constantly absorbing everything, we need to start looking inside and start to kind of parse out the different things and really start to learn about ourselves. And I think that's the missing piece is of course, we have these kind of early childhood development, and we do understand those phases of early childhood development very well, where we're learning and our brains are expanding and we're learning about ourselves and how we're going to be in the world and our personality and that sort of stuff. But we never like make that flip where we stop, looking to the outside world to learn, and we start looking inward to learn. And I think that's what Stoicism brings, or philosophy in general, is that you take that time, that pause, that moment of reflection, and you actually look inside. Hey, I've learned all this new stuff. I've absorbed all these information and experiences throughout my life. Well, now let's make sense of it. Now let's see how I want to apply it over the next period of my life. So yeah, I think it's unfortunate that some people only discover and start to learn about themselves later in life. But the fact that, I and you guys have done this early is going to pay out dividends for the rest of your life, because it truly is like knowing yourself is ultimately the goal. It just takes some time, and you need that life experience to kind of go through. And I think that is what your younger years, your teenage years, and that sort of stuff is for. And then as you enter into your 20s and you're going into adulthood, it's like, okay, now I got to take these experiences and take this information that I've gathered and really start to figure out, what does that say about me? How do I interact with the world and this sort of thing? And for some reason, there's just this adversity to not wanting to have those kind of deep reflection and deep thought moments. And that's unfortunately the sad part of life. And I feel like if people did do that, there would be a lot more happier people. There are a lot more people with some stoic joy versus this kind of doom and gloom situation that we do find a lot of people in.
And I think secondary to that as well is once you kind of go or introduced to that journey and you experience that stoic joy, is I think you have then a responsibility to go out and share that joy. And that's what we've tried to do with the podcast. And I think, that's what you guys try and do at Via Stoica and with the spaces on X is just sharing the Stoic concepts to provide that joy. Because we talk about all the time about community. We talked about community a lot today as well. The way that we build that community is we don't, discover these great principles within ourselves and then just hunker down and go off the grid and don't talk to anybody about it. There's a responsibility there to say, hey, look, this has worked for me. I went from somebody who didn't know how to deal with X, Y, and Z to now I'm thriving. Here's how I did it. There's that responsibility there. And now it's interesting you mentioned the infant aspect of it, because I've been reading John Locke this week about epistemology, and he had a quote that I actually texted Matteo that I found a lot of stoicism in, and it says, men's business in them is to acquaint themselves with what is to be found without. And so growing up in a constant attention to outward sensations, seldom make any considerable reflection on what passes within them till they come to be of riper years, and some scarce ever at all. It's just it's very curious to me. When we grow up, right, we're experiencing all these new things, right? We're experiencing all these new phenomenons. When we're an infant, right, it's colors and lights and noises and all those things. When we're in our teenage years, it's, more social aspects, social interactions, things like that, to where we're always constantly busy and we're never really truly reflecting on the inner mechanisms that go on within us. That's what John Locke's alluding to there. And it's something, so it's very interesting. You kind of paraphrased it within your response, so I just wanted to bring that up. But I think there's something to be said that even when you are like a toddler, you're 6 or you're 8, right? Like it's very difficult to give the advice of like, oh, be reflecting when you're 8, right? Because 8-year-olds just want to go out and explore. But the sooner that you can discover your inner mechanisms, the sooner you can say, all right, why am I thinking this? The better off you are. So, it might seem silly to say to like an 8-year-old, like think a little bit more about things that are just not like the instant reactions to sensations. But the sooner you are able to do that, the sooner you become mature and the sooner you're able to discover your joy, I feel like. And that's the final message I want to leave today is just discovering that inner joy and then going out and spreading it. Because no matter what age it is, whether you're in your 20s, whether you're a teenager, whether you're 40, 50, 60, eventually you have to discover that there's more than just sensation. There's more than just reaction. There's reflection. And once you discover that point, use that shift to go and change your environment and change your community. I think is the best advice that you can give.
Absolutely. No, that's definitely it. And I think, the way you worded it was perfectly this idea that's we are based in reaction a lot. We are taught, really, if you think about it, to react more than we are to reflect. And it's when you can take that moment of pause to really sit there with the situation and not just react, but I guess react in a thoughtful, loving way versus just being solely reactive. That's where true power comes from. When the person that's not freaking out when everyone else is freaking out, that's the person with control, with power. That's not it's not the people that are running around concerned. It's the person that does have that ability to put a space between them and their emotions. And that's something that I think Stoics do quite well is, people say that Stoics are not emotional, right? They're just stone faced, and that couldn't be further from the truth. The only difference is that a Stoic recognizes all their emotion, feels all their emotions, has all those emotions, but there's just a space between that emotion and their reaction. And that's where, and it's such a small space, but that's where that's where the magic happens, is in that little space, where you go out into the world and you decide, what, this is the person I want to be, and this is how I want to react to certain events, not the way that my ego might be driving me to, or something like that. But no, very well said. Completely agree.
Yeah, I think, like you said, the power is in being calm and being someone that people would look up to. No one's going to look up to the people running around. People are going to look up to the guy who's like sitting there, boom, ready to go. He's stoic. And that's the big misconception around Stoicism, is that they're not emotional. It's tough. That's like the first thing we get is like, oh, you're Stoic, so you just like ashwagandha all the time, like you just never cry, you know? And you're like, no, I feel emotions just like you. We're all human. I just know when and where is the appropriate place to show them. But I think kind of the big lesson that we can take away today from this conversation is just intentionality. It really is being intentional with where you're putting your time, where you're putting your thoughts, where you're choosing to, really just have your mindset. It's about being intentional with every step you take throughout the day. And, Brendan, it's been a great conversation today with you. And I think, we have learned a lot from you, and we hope that you have learned a lot from us. And if you've made it this far into the episode, I would encourage you to check out Via Stoica and see what Brendan and Benny are doing. And I think the other guy is Bryce, correct? It is
Yeah,
Bryce. Because as we had Benny on a couple weeks ago, and we're now having Brendan on now, as similar and as close as they are, they're both giving us very different perspectives on Stoicism, and that's a beautiful thing. So if you've made it this far in the episode, be sure to check out our website, and you can view all our episodes on there. And this has been the Gen Z Stoic podcast. Brendan, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for your time. We've had the pleasure, of hosting you and hearing what you've had to say, and we'd honestly love to have you on again in the future.
Absolutely, definitely. As often as you guys want, I'll be here. You just let me know.
Thank you, Brendan. So if you made it this far, this has been the Gen Z Stoic podcast with Brendan, and thank you very much for joining. We will see you guys next time.